Hello again. This is the second part of our mid-semester 2 revision. And in this slide, we have an answer to a very important question that is frequently encountered on the test. And that question is, how do newborn acquire their flora? And when I say this, I mean all the flora. So the newborn the newborn infant acquires the skin flora through the passage in the vaginal microbiome. So it takes from the flora on the inner vaginal wall of the mother. It also takes the skin flora from handling by nurses, by the parents, by medical doctors, although, of course, the medical staff should be wearing sterile gloves. And the third type of flora that is acquired by the baby are the gut flora, and they are acquired when the baby or the newborn suckles milk from the breast of the mom. So all the flora on the skin of the nipple, of the areola, which is the pigmented part around the nipple, and on the breast itself will enter with milk to the gut. And the flora that enters the gut or the flora that is acquired on the skin will be stabilized and well established and start increasing in number within first 48 hours after birth, and this is highly protective to the baby. In the next slide, we will talk about symbiosis. What is symbiosis? Symbiosis is the relationship between any two organisms of two different species, and symbiosis has many types. So I might ask you about the definition of symbiosis or about the types of symbiosis. So if I ever ask you about the types of symbiosis, you would say commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. And of course, you can be asked about the definition of each of them. And if you are asked about the definition of each of them, then it would be a very easy question. Let's talk first about commensalism, because there is a lot of things to say about commensalism. Originally, commensalism is a symbiotic relationship. So whenever you come to definition of any of these three items or scientific terms, you will start by it is symbiosis, or it is a symbiotic relationship where so and so and so, and you start explaining what happens in this symbiotic relationship. So in commensalism, it's a symbiotic relationship between two organisms when one organism, which is the commensal flora, benefits and takes food and shelter, whereas the other organism is neither harmed nor benefited. So the commensal is supposed to cause no harm and no benefit. So, but this has recently been proved, and all what has previously, this has recently been disproved, because all the relationships that were previously considered as symbiosis are now considered mutualism. What is mutualism? Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship where there is mutual exchange between the two partners, meaning that it is a win-win relationships and both partners benefit. What I can ask you to justify, why is the relationship between flora and between friendly flora in particular and the human being considered mutualism and not commensalism? So you have to give evidence. You have to give evidence of what? You have to give evidence of mutual exchange of benefits between the flora and man. So you have to mention first, because you always forget this, you have to mention that the friendly flora take home and shelter from the human being, and in exchange, they provide services to the human being. What kind of services do they provide? They provide local immunity, and they compete with pathogens. Let's start by letter B, which is the easiest one. They compete with pathogens just by being there, just by occupying the habitat, and therefore they occupy space, and therefore they prevent the pathogens from colonization. And the second benefit they provide is local immunity. We have said several times before that the friendly flora teach the local immune system. First of all, they stimulate the local immune systems, and meanwhile teach them, when they are stimulated, not to attack them as friendly flora, but only to attack the pathogens. And therefore, there is nothing like true commensalism in the human body, or purely commensal flora. Does commensalism exist in nature? Yes, it exists in nature, like we've mentioned in the classroom, in certain marine organisms like the whale and the barnacles, for example. But in which case the whale provides shelter and provides food, the bits of food or the remains of food of the shark, and the barnacles benefit from this, from the food and shelter, but they do not give anything in exchange. But in the human body, I can ask you to justify there are no purely commensal flora, because actually they are mutualistic like the colonic flora. The last one is parasitism, and parasitism is a symbiotic, again, relationship where one organism provides harm to the other. So, for example, all pathogenic bacteria, they take benefit from the human body, but in exchange, they do not give anything beneficial. They just give toxins, carcinogens, and cause harm, like toxins, carcinogens, and products of putrefaction. Of course, I might ask you to justify the fact that every individual has its own microbiome. Or similarly, I might ask you to justify that the microbiome of every individual is unique, like a DNA print or a fingerprint. That's because it depends on very specific factors. It depends on factors that are specific to every individual, that are unique to every individual. Like what? Number one, the genes you have inherited from your parents, and in particular, the maternal genes you've inherited from your mom. The second thing, the way you were delivered. There are some people who are delivered normally through normal vaginal delivery, and others that are delivered through cesarean sections. Of course, those who are delivered via normal vaginal delivery will have more diversity of the skin microbiome than those who are delivered through cesarean section. And the microbiome that they will acquire from the mom will also be unique, because it will depend partly on the genes of their moms. Number three, the way you were fed. There are some newborn infants that are fed through breastfeeding, and others through bottle feeding. Of course, those who are fed through breastfeeding will have a more diverse microbiome. Why do they have a more diverse microbiome? Because they will ingest, first of all, because I might ask you this question, justify breastfeeding allows a more diverse microbiome. First of all, because number one, because when the infant suckles milk, all the friendly flora on the skin of the nipple and the areola will be introduced into the gut. And number two, which we have mentioned in the late slides, that the breast milk contains a growth factor that stimulates the growth of very useful friendly flora called bifidobacteria. So again, when I ask you why breastfeeding enriches the gut microbiome, you mentioned suckling and how it transfers skin flora, and you mentioned the growth factor and how it helps the growth of bifidobacteria. It's also unique because it depends on your specific age. The older you grow, the less diverse your microbiome is, because of many factors. We're not going to mention them now because it would make things more complex. But what you have to know is that when you are old, and this diminishes the ratio of friendly flora in the gut, then automatically, I might ask you about the consequences. This will diminish the chemical signals that are released by the friendly flora and go via blood to communicate with the brain. These chemical signals or these chemical molecules that are secreted by friendly flora in the gut and pass through the blood to the brain, these chemicals are good for the health of the brain. So if the brain is deprived of these chemical signals, this will diminish the condition and the function of the brain cells and might result in deterioration of the brain cells or degeneration of the brain cells or diminished function of the brain cells, a condition called Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's usually affects old people, but when your diet is poor, then, or when you're exposed to any of the factors that harm the ratio, then like a poor diet, for example, or like chemotherapy, then you might have premature or early Alzheimer's disease, and it is mainly characterized by loss of memory. Your microbiome is also unique because it depends on your gender, whether you are a male or a female, and most probably it's hormone influenced. Your microbiome is unique because it depends upon the amount and frequency of stress you are exposed to. For example, during certain periods in life that are known to be stressful, like, for example, weaning of the newborn, weaning of the infants at the age of 2, or eruption of the permanent teeth after having lost the milk teeth, or at the age of puberty, as you know, or menopause, which is the cessation of menstruation and the menstrual cycle in an old female around the age of 45. All these stressful events are associated with hormonal disturbances in the body, or hormonal changes at least, and will affect the microbiome. The type of diet is greatly affecting your microbiome. So your microbiome is unique because your diet is unique. So if you eat a lot of white sugar and a lot of refined grains like white rice, like pasta, and all this kind of stuff, then this will feed the bad bacteria or the bad flora inside your gut, and of course will suppress the friendly flora. But if you eat healthy food, rich in prebiotics, meaning that it is rich in fibers, especially vegetables and fruits, then you are breeding healthy bacteria. On the last thing, or the last important factor that makes your microbiome is unique, is the medications or the medication you take. So if you take, for example, just like diet has two aspects, a good aspect and a bad aspect, medications and pills have two aspects. The bad aspect is when you take antibiotics or chemotherapy, for example, that is highly destructive to the flora in general in your gut, and in particular to the friendly flora, which are more affected because they are more abundant. And another aspect of medication is the good medication. When you take pills, for example, when you take probiotics or pills containing friendly bacteria, you're adding useful flora to your gut. Now we've said that the flora on our skin are either friendly or pathogenic. Pathogenic flora stay pathogenic forever. But do friendly flora stay friendly forever? No, they can turn into pathogenic flora if they themselves are exposed to stress from their point of view as bacteria, or if the human host is exposed to stress, like, for example, number one, which is the immunocompromisation. So I might ask you to justify that some friendly flora are converted into pathogenic flora. If the host is immunocompromised, then immunocompromised means that there is a severe drop in the power of the immune system in the human body, like when you take, for example, chemotherapy or when you take radiotherapy. In such a way, the friendly flora act in an opportunistic way and take benefit or advantage from that temporary weakness of the immune system in the human body and will attack, although usually they do not attack or invade. Now, I might ask you another justify question. Justify chemotherapy and radiation therapy cause immunocompromisation. This is because chemotherapy and radiation therapy destroy mainly the white blood cells that are concerned with immunity. And chemotherapy, of course, does this because the chemotherapy medication runs into the blood. It is usually taken by injection, so it goes to the bone marrow and affects the white blood cells because the bone marrow produces white blood cells and the lymph nodes. On the other hand, in radiation therapy, especially if radiation therapy affects the lymph nodes and the bone, then there will be diminished production and diminished function of the white blood cells. So the host becomes weak, or the host immunity becomes weak, and that's a good opportunity for opportunistic friendly flora to turn into pathogens. The second factor that helps flora, or that justifies the conversion of flora into pathogens, is any hormonal change that can occur in the human body. And the best example for this, I might ask you about this specifically. Give an example to justify that hormonal changes might cause friendly flora to turn pathogenic. You would give the very famous example of puberty and the rise and the surge that occurs in androgen levels in blood, and how this causes P. acnes to be pathogenic and cause acne vulgaris. The last factor here that encourages friendly flora to be converted into pathogens is any injury, even a minor superficial injury or a minor abrasion in the skin or in the mucous membrane can result in entry of the microbe into the blood or into the tissues and cause infection. Of course, the morphology of bacteria, or the different shapes of bacteria and how they are classified, is very important. And I might ask you to draw the morphological classification of bacteria, in which case you will start first by drawing a spherical bacterium, a rod-shaped bacterium, and a spiral bacterium. In the rod-shaped bacteria, we have only studied them when they are separate. So you just say bacilli. You draw many of them and you say bacilli. Here, you just say spirilla or spiral bacteria. But here, you have to draw the subtypes. So there is the monococcus, and then the diplococci, where we have two joined together, and then the streptococci, where we have a chain of spherical bacteria, and then we have the tetrads, where we have 4, and then the sarcina, where we have 8 arranged in a cubical manner, and then we have the staphylococci, where we have a grape-like structure. And I might ask you to define any of these. So you might draw, or you might describe the morphology. So if I ever ask you, what does the term staphylococci refer to? You would say they are spherical bacteria that are arranged in grape-like structures, okay? As we said before, the skin microbiome has been acquired from handling, has been acquired from the vagina of the mom, and that it is very diverse, and it includes mostly friendly flora, as it is written on the slide. And we have mentioned that the armpits, the axilla, the groin, and the area between the toes are the most abundantly inhabited by the friendly flora. And I might ask you to justify. So you would say, because of the relative warmth, these areas are like flexures of the skin or folds, and they are warm because they trap the heat. And meanwhile, they have a high moisture content. Of course, the axilla and the groin have sweat secretion, and similarly between the toes, you have the sweat secretion, and sometimes you have the sweat staying on your socks, for example, for long, and you didn't have time to change your socks during the day. So this encourages infections, especially in particular fungal infections. Fungal organisms are very weak, but because there is here a good opportunity for them to live, so they thrive. What are the major examples of bacteria that are present on the skin? We have Staphylococci and P. acnes. Staphylococci are usually friendly flora, but they might turn pathogenic. And when they turn pathogenic, they cause infection on the skin like boils and abscesses. But P. acnes is usually friendly, mutualistic, and why is it mutualistic? Because the P. acnes occupy space. They produce fatty acids that inhibit the growth of pathogens, and they stimulate the local immune system. How? Now we know that they stimulate the local immune system by cross-reactivity and microbial antagonism. So again, if I ever ask you, why do we consider P. acnes mutualistic? Don't forget to mention that what they take from us. They take food and shelter from us, and in exchange, they occupy space. They produce fatty acids to inhibit the growth of fungi like Candida albicans, which is a unicellular fungus, and they stimulate the local immune system, as we said before, by cross-reactivity and by microbial antagonism, and they teach the immune system not to attack them, but to attack the pathogens only. But if it happens that P. acnes gets trapped inside the sebaceous glands or inside the hair follicles, then the P. acnes will get mad. They will turn aggressive. They will turn pathogenic. They will cause inflammation of the sweat glands and the hair follicles and cause acne vulgaris. So what is acne vulgaris? As you see here, acne vulgaris is an inflammatory disease starting at puberty. So I might ask you, it is a chronic, actually, inflammatory disease, which starts at puberty. I might ask you to justify each of these terms. Why is it an inflammatory disease? Because it is associated with the symptoms of inflammation or with the signs of inflammation. And you have to be very careful when saying symptoms or signs concerning the pain, because if it is a symptom, we say pain. If it is a sign, we say tenderness. So we have the cardinal signs of inflammation. So again, acne vulgaris is an inflammatory disease because it is associated with the signs of inflammation, which are swelling, redness, tenderness, and warmth. I might also ask you to justify that why is acne vulgaris a chronic disease? It is a chronic disease because of three main characteristics. As just like any other chronic disease, a slow onset, a prolonged course, and mild symptoms and signs. On the other hand, what are acute inflammations or acute diseases? They are diseases that have a sudden onset, not a slow onset. Chronic has a slow onset. I just want to make sure that I said chronic has a slow onset, prolonged course, and mild symptoms and signs. Whereas an acute disease has a sudden, rapid onset, a short course, and very intensive symptoms and signs. Here we have two scientific terms that are important. The mere swelling, just by being swollen, of the sebaceous glands, even if they're not inflamed, is called a comedone. So what is a comedone with an N? It is a swollen, you can just remind yourself with this N, comedone is a swollen sebaceous gland, whereas a comedo is the blackhead that appears sometimes when you scratch and when you cause a lot of injury here, and then it heals by forming healing tissue, and then the severe inflammation might cause the comedo. So the comedo is a blackhead here on top of the sebaceous gland, and it is nothing but dead tissue because of the repeated inflammation. And now we come to the structure of the sebaceous gland. As you see, the sebaceous gland is an exocrine gland. So I might ask you about the sebaceous gland and whether it is exocrine or endocrine. Why is it exocrine? Because it has a duct. Number two, the sebaceous gland secretes sebum, which is a fatty, oily material. Why is sebum important? Because it makes the hair soft and pliable. And then number three, the sebaceous gland usually opens into a hair follicle. What is a hair follicle? It is the pocket of skin around the hair that protects the skin. And actually, what happens at puberty? At puberty, number one, there is an androgenic surge, meaning that the level of androgen increases tremendously. And then what does this androgen surge cause? It affects sebum and affects the epidermis. It causes the sebum to be more abundant, increases in quantity, thicker and stickier. And this makes the sebum block the duct of the gland. Similarly, androgen does something else. It comes to the epidermis here, or the cells lining the duct, and it stimulates epidermal proliferation, meaning that it increases the rate of cell division. So the cells increase greatly in number, and this is another factor that blocks the sebaceous duct. So what are the factors that block the sebaceous duct? Number one, sebum, the changes that occurred in sebum, and number two, the epidermal proliferation. The next question would be, what happens when the gland duct is obstructed? Does the gland stop producing sebum? No, it continues producing sebum, but the duct is occluded. So the result is that the gland will be swollen with sebum, and this is what we call the comedone. Who is inside the sebaceous gland and inside the hair follicle? We have P. acnes, which used to be friendly, but after having been imprisoned in the sebaceous gland, it will get mad, it will turn pathogenic, and it will cause inflammation. So the comedone, which was originally just a swelling, having the same color as the skin, after P. acnes gets mad, the comedone becomes red and inflamed because of the inflammation caused by P. acnes. And this is how hormonal changes caused acne vulgaris, because this itself or on its own can be a question. Explain how hormonal changes cause acne vulgaris. So you have to start by the androgenic surge and end up by reaching the stage of the comedone, the redness, and the comedose. Okay, what are the factors that help acne vulgaris development? Of course, number one, the hormonal factors. We have just mentioned the hormonal factors. And number two, we have also mentioned P. acnes. If there is no P. acnes on this, if there were no P. acnes on the skin, we wouldn't have suffered from, or we wouldn't suffer from acne vulgaris. And number three, the genetic factors, meaning that you might pass through hormonal changes, you have P. acnes on your skin, but you don't necessarily develop acne vulgaris. This is because you are not genetically predisposed. So genetic predisposition on its own is a factor, but genetic predisposition also affects the nature of your skin. So some people have oily skin, whereas other people have dry skin. It would also affect your food preferences. So if you eat a lot of chocolate, dairy products, and nuts, then you're more exposed. So I might ask you only about this entity. How does the nature of your skin affect your development of acne vulgaris? So you would say, if my skin is oily, I would have a higher incidence. How do genes affect this? So genes affect the nature of your skin and your food preferences. I might ask you, what kind of food increases the incidence of acne vulgaris? You might talk about nuts, chocolate, and dairy products. And now we come to the nasal cavity microbiome, but we will leave it to the third part of the video in order to make life easier, to make your life and my life easier. So thank you guys, and I'll see you in the third part of the video, inshallah. Bye.